Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. We are coming to you live from New Orleans, Louisiana, where we're getting ready for Thursday's Sugar Bowl, getting ready for number 3 Georgia, number 6 Ole Miss. A lot to get into on today's episode. We're going to talk about what was going on Tuesday, which was the Sugar Bowl Media Day. That gave us an opportunity to talk to a lot of Georgia players, Georgia assistant coaches. We'll share what stood out to us there. We're also going to get into this game. We are not going to do a preview episode of this game, given New Year's Eve coming up, given everything that's still going on. And I'll kind of lay out what the schedule is the next few days a little bit later on in this episode. But we'll talk about our expectations, the rematch between Georgia-Ole Miss, what we think we'll see Georgia in the Sugar Bowl for the second straight year. Can they avenge what was a tough loss to Notre Dame this past January? But Ben, I'll start with you, and we'll get into the media day part of it in a few minutes, but just what have been your initial thoughts on being in New Orleans so far and how the week has started off?
Yeah, it feels like we were just here yesterday, Jordan. We were here yesterday, but it feels like it's not so long ago that we were at the last iteration of the Sugar Bowl, and I think that Kirby Smart's been asked more times than he cares to, probably about last year's game and all of those types of things, but just being at the team arrival, being at the Sugar Bowl Media Day today, you straight up you get insights into this football program at this thing that and in a way that you're just not going to get naturally just because of the way that Kirby Smart allows us to engage with the team as media members. And so we got some opportunities yesterday to see them arrive at the airport, and I think that probably gave us some injury insights before that availability report came out. And then as well, just getting to be in the ballroom with them today over at the Sheridan, and I learned a lot about a lot of different things, and I know you did as well.
Absolutely, and it was a good time. I always look forward to the media day, and for folks who aren't as familiar with how Georgia's set up and kind of going inside baseball here, when we cover Georgia, they do not make freshman players available to the media. We don't get assistant coaches except for once during fall camp. At the media day for the playoff, it's free reign. All assistant coaches, on-field assistant coaches are available. All players, including all true freshmen, are available for about 45 minutes, so you're kind of making your rounds. And we'll kind of focus a good bit of the first part of this podcast on what we learned as part of it. And it was a great time. I wrote a notebook with a lot of insight and a lot of intel that I got from mostly talking to the freshmen. That's usually my mindset when I'm at this, because we don't get to talk to these guys, learn about them, how their first season's gone, what it's been like. At the top, talked to Isaiah Gibson. He sounded like he's fully bought into coming back to Georgia in 2026. There's been a lot of questions. Anytime you have a five-star who hasn't really played a role, you just automatically wonder, is this guy sticking around? Is he going to hit the transfer portal? He sounded like he's committed. I shout out on threes Jeremy Johnson. He had talked to Ryan Puglisi, and it sounds like Ryan Puglisi is planning to be back at Georgia, the backup quarterback for Georgia. So that's interesting as well. Focusing on some of the guys I talked to, really impressed with Elijah Griffin. I thought it was big, and I mentioned this in the notebook I wrote. He said, I don't think I've played my best game yet. And if I am an opposing offensive lineman, any of these teams still left in the playoff, that has to catch my attention. Elijah was really good. Really, on the whole, the freshmen I talked to, I was impressed just because these guys don't have a lot of media training. They haven't talked to us at all, and I thought for the most part they did really well. Talked to Rayshawn Dinkins. He is a guy, before this game, I'm probably going to have a story that's like, here's 5 or 6 Georgia players that could be make or break in the Sugar Bowl, and Rayshawn Dinkins is going to be one of them. Janelle Aguero being ruled out on Monday night. And Rayshawn, really talked about that he had been preparing like a starter since he got to Georgia. And again, this is a guy that was a summer enrollee. We were talking about this, Ben, before we started recording. Man, the hit rate on the summer enrollees for Georgia, with him and Dontrell Glover both.
I think about a year ago with Nate Frazier as well. They're just hitting on these summer enrollees these days.
Yeah, it's absurd. But, Rayshawn talked about the fact that he'd been preparing like a starter, and, that was sort of his mentality. And, man, it showed up, and he was very team-oriented. I asked him about winning an SEC title, and, that was his first start. And how he played and his performance. And he said, look, it's about the team winning the SEC championship. It's not about me. So I was really impressed there. Thinking about some of the other guys, I talked to, Dom Kelly, who hasn't played a ton, but again, when I bring him up, I always say this guy should be a senior in high school. And I talked to him about the fact that when he's been in, and especially been in mop-up duty, he's given up some plays. And I just asked him about learning from that, and he said, as a cornerback, you can't ride the wave of emotions, whether you have a big play or whether things don't go your way, to just be even killed. And I described him as wise beyond his years, and I still think that's the case. And he showed that with just his approach and what he was saying. Some of the other folks that I talked to, it all runs together because it's 45 minutes of just trying to track people down and trying to talk to different people. Really, the only assistant coach I talked to was Stacy Searles, and Stacy was really good. I asked him about, had he played this many freshmen on an offensive line and had them play this well, and he pointed out some of the guys that I remember. When I was growing up and rooting for Georgia, Cordy Glenn and Ben Jones, Trenton Sturdivant, mentioned some of those names, but he really credited the preparation Juan Gaston had. He raved about him in the spring, what he did in the spring. And then Dontrell Glover, his ability, like we were just talking about, to come in during the summer and make an impression like he did. And he spoke highly of any of the Langston Hughes coaches. Anyone listening to this has a connection there. Go read the quote that he gave about how Langston Hughes prepares those guys, and he gave them a lot of credit on top of what Donnie's able to do. That was very impressive to me. So we'll start just with some of that stuff I talked about, Ben, before we kind of get into what you learned. But anything stick out to you from some of those guys I talked to and some of the things that I pulled from that?
Well, for starters, you mentioned, and I asked you this before we got on, like, who was the person that you enjoyed chatting with the most? And you said Rayshawn Dinkins. And I think that it's like, to your point, we're talking about guys that make or break this football game that we're about to watch. Like, he is it. Janelle Aguero is not going to be available. Rayshawn Dinkins has grown super fast as a summer enrollee to the point where I think, I talked with Travaris Robinson about him a little bit and Dante Williams a little bit about him as well. Like, they trust that dude as much as they trust anybody in that room. Like, he is wired in a way, he has a mindset, he has a maturity about him. And those are the types of qualities that allow you to play early at Georgia. Like, yeah, being a freak athlete helps, but if you're going to play as a true freshman, like the identity trait that Nate Frazier and Dontrell Glover and Rayshawn Dinkins all have is that they are all wired like Georgia football players. Like, they live and breathe the Georgia football mindset. I think that Rayshawn Dinkins is a great example of that. And I think that he understands the magnitude of what he's going to be stepping into against a really explosive passing offense this upcoming weekend as well. You mentioned some of the other freshmen, like Elijah Griffin. I was thrilled that and anybody who follows us over at Dog 24/7 has gotten some exposure to Elijah Griffin already, and they know how special of a guy he is and how impressive he is when you put a microphone in front of him. But for everyone else to kind of get that experience as well, I think that it's a great opportunity for him to just sort of showcase why he's been so successful as a true freshman as well. On the news front, and again, we take it a little bit with a grain of salt this time of year just because they're preparing for a Sugar Bowl. The transfer portal doesn't open until January 2nd. Technically, I think it'll extend past the semifinal game, so Georgia really wouldn't have to have anybody intend to enter the transfer portal until after that. All that to say, hearing what Isaiah Gibson said to you and how he described his commitment level to Georgia and why it is that he is not looking around or thinking of it the way that maybe people have been assuming, I think that's a really good indicator of what Georgia should expect for him in the future. But also, I just think that that's a mindset that exists and permeates itself throughout the program. Like, yes, Georgia is not impervious to people transferring. There will be players that transfer, and there will be key players over the course of time that will transfer away from Georgia. But by and large, I think you can find a lot of examples like Isaiah Gibson, where he comes in as a 5-star. He doesn't play a whole lot as a true freshman, and there are assumptions. There is noise, like, is he going to be leaving? I don't necessarily know if that's the way a lot of these guys think about it. Like, some of them do, but you can point to all sorts of examples. Raylan Wilson or Jordan Hall, who they were 5-stars. They didn't play right away, and you look at them, and I know Jordan's not going to be available for this game, but like, you look at a guy like Raylan, like, you look at him right now, getting on the field right away as a true freshman is not necessarily the indicator of what your football career is going to look like. And I think that Isaiah seemed to have that mindset, at least from your conversation with him.
Yeah, to not spoil the story, because you can go read what I wrote over on Dogs 24/7. But part of the quote, I don't plan on leaving anywhere. Like I said, it's a brotherhood, right? You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to no school for anything other than this. This is where I need to be.
This is where I need to be.
It was not a, no, I'm staying, and that was it. Like I think that he was being genuinely true, and like Ben said, you can't read too much into this. I'll shout out again, Dogs HQ's Jake Rowe. I remember when there were rumors about AD Mitchell transferring to Texas, he straight up asked him, and he was like, "No, I'm not going anywhere." And then he wound up transferring. But again, I was very impressed with how Isaiah handled it, because I genuinely didn't know what he would say, and being asked that question. So was impressed with that, what he had to say. So I'll turn it over to you, Ben. You made the rounds just like I did. What did you learn? What sort of stood out to you from your conversations today?
Well, maybe not as Sugar Bowl oriented necessarily, but to Jordan's point on the inside baseball side of it, we get 45 minutes straight where I can just go connect with all of the Georgia position coaches on record about a bunch of the guys that they just signed in the 2026 class who they haven't been able to talk about publicly prior to that. And so I think you can get some really good insights into the recruiting class that Georgia just signed in the 2026 cycle. I don't want to, because this is a Sugar Bowl show, I don't want to like linger too much on that part of it, because we'll have plenty of content post Sugar Bowl into the offseason a little bit about the guys that Georgia's bringing in, what the perspective from the coaches is in terms of why they wanted them, what stood out to them, what roles they're going to play in Athens. Like, got some awesome stuff from all of the position coaches except for Glenn Schumann, but that's okay. That was a hand up. I'm just going to take accountability publicly that I didn't get to Glenn Schumann during that media availability, but got a chance to talk to every other position coach, and I think that this staff is super excited about the group that they brought in. I mean, sure, they're going to gush about their players, but the way that Trey Scott talked about the defensive linemen that he brought in, the way that Dante Williams talked about the defensive backs that he brought in. I mean, Todd Hartley, it goes without saying, I don't know that there's a person on earth that loves their football players more than Todd Hartley loves his football players, and you really felt that in those conversations. So that's what really stood out to me personally from my conversations. I did, of course, have some chats with some other people about, like I was talking to James Coley about the receiver recruiting and how when you've got guys like Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas and London Humphreys and Colby Young that have come into Georgia, and especially in Zachariah Branch's case, and they have provided this proof of concept of being a national recruit at the receiver position, and that you come to Georgia as a portal receiver, does having that proof of concept just establish your ability to go get guys with a national profile at receiver in the portal now? And he said, yeah, it does. But we want that to be the case for any player that we're wanting to get. Like, I don't want it to be an exclusively portal thing. I want it to be Zachariah Branch comes in, Noah Thomas comes in, and they develop in X, Y, and Z areas, and they become better receivers because they got to Georgia. And that doesn't just sell itself to a transfer portal guy, which it should, but it doesn't just do that. It also sells it to high school guys. And he was talking about 27s, 28s that he's going to be recruiting. He wants them to see it that way, but he doesn't want them just to be looking at those guys. He wants them, he called out specifically Dylan Bell. He's like, I want them to see a guy like Dylan Bell who came in as an undervalued recruit that nobody was really talking about, and he stayed there for his entire college football career, and they used him in a million different ways, and now he's going to be playing, in his second straight Sugar Bowl as back-to-back SEC champ, and is a feature piece of what this offense wants to do. And so I bring up all that to say, like, I think that Coley sees a very bright future in terms of how Georgia is going to be able to collect talent on this roster because of a lot of what they've done from a versatility standpoint in the high school recruiting market, but also in the transfer portal recruiting market. So I thought that was really a fascinating conversation as well. One thing I will call out, and this was, I wasn't talking to him specifically, but Kirby Smart also sat down for like 40 minutes, which is like one of the longer press conferences that he has. We don't spend as much time with him, honestly, during that, because we do have access to all these players and position coaches and things like that. But a couple of the things that he brought up during that, as I was reading through the transcript, it sounds, and this isn't a surprise to anyone, but it sounds like Dontrell Glover is going to be able to play and said today that he was proud of the way that him and Bo have responded to how they've challenged them, the things that they've made them do, as I would imagine a very tiresome and painful disciplinary process that they've probably had to go through after and before practices. But it does sound like he's going to be available. I mean, Dontrell seemed to be in good spirits yesterday when he got off the plane. I know that a few people got a chance to talk with him today during media day. You know, Bo Walker the same way. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there wasn't a ton of like newsy stuff that came out of this, but it's always a very, very insightful 45 minutes from our standpoint.
Yeah, you learn a lot about really in general, and again, you have free access to everybody. And don't beat yourself up too bad on Glenn Schumann. I missed out. I was trying to get Mike Bobo and kind of, was up against the clock. 45 minutes goes by a lot quicker than you think.
Especially, I mean, when you get Todd Hartley talking, man. I didn't want to get out of that conversation, but I was like, man, I don't know if I'm ever going to stop talking to Todd Hartley about his tight ends. He loves them so much.
Absolutely, and I'll shout out to our intern Olivia Sayer. Really helped me get through trying to talk to as many freshmen, because we were communicating back and forth as I was making the rounds, she was making the rounds, and I was like, man, we hit our list. Like, we did exactly what we wanted to do, so Olivia did a great job there. All right, Ben, before we take a break, let's talk about the injury front. We got to be at team arrival on Monday. They've had the availability report, the initial one. The biggest thing for Georgia, Gabe Harris out as expected. Star Janelle Aguero out as well. The other players out, no big surprise. Kyron Jones, Jordan Hall, Drew Bobo. The good news, Colby Young's available, and Ethan Barbour is, I will say for both, they are probable. So, we don't know for sure. There will be other availability reports. But let's start with the good news with Colby and Ethan. What that would mean to get those guys back, and just your thoughts. As they are listed again as of Tuesday as probable.
Well, that triggered another thought from me as well. So I'm going to have two thoughts now that I'm answering this question for you. But Colby Young, seeing both of them as probable, I think is very, very reassuring. I'm not necessarily saying I'm surprised that both are listed as probable, but I felt that Ethan Barbour was probably more likely to be probable than Colby Young was, based on things that we've been hearing, but also just based on our brief viewing of practice. Ethan looked a lot more full go, so to speak, than Colby did. But at this point in time, when you're probable at this juncture in the week, chances are you're going to be playing in that game. So that's a great sign. I think the bigger question becomes, being available is one thing, but how many reps and snaps are you actually going to get? Colby Young, there were points in time in the season where he was playing like 40, 50 snaps. I mean, he was the leading rep guy at wide receiver. That's not what you should be expecting in the Sugar Bowl, but does he get some opportunities? I definitely think that's the case. I think that because of the mismatch problems that he presents, like, Mike Bobo is probably going to be able to get really creative in the small spots where they end up using Colby Young if they're able to. On the Ethan Barbour front, for starters, he looked awesome the other day when we were out at practice. I couldn't believe it when I was watching him move. And we'd heard, like, hey, things are moving better in the right direction for Ethan Barbour. But until you can see it with your own eyes, I'm always very skeptical of, like, how well he's moving and what things look like. I mean, I'd be shocked if he isn't fully available. Again, he's a true freshman. He hasn't played since week 2. How much can you really expect him in? But what I'll say is, I think that they trust him in a way when it comes to blocking and other things that he does, that it is going to change the personnel groupings that Mike Bobo is going to feel comfortable working with. And I think that, I'm not saying he's going to go out and play 20 snaps, but if he plays 5 or 6 snaps, like if you see some red zone packages where Georgia's running 13 personnel and Ethan Barbour's out there, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all, just because I think he's ready to go. And this goes to my other thought that you triggered in me when you asked the question. I talked with Todd Hartley and Ethan Barbour about his just recovery process. And I asked Ethan, like, how you feeling? He says he feels great. He's a business-only kind of guy. He's like, I feel good. I'm ready to go, whatever. I asked Hartley about it, and I was just like, are you as surprised as I am that he's already ready to go? And he was like, honestly, yes, because it was just a horrific-looking injury when it happened. But he said that he was like, he said that after that week 2 injury, whether it was rehab, conditioning, in practices, no matter what, Ethan Barbour attacked every single meeting, session, workout, whatever it was they were in, was going to be playing that next Saturday. And he knew he probably might not be playing for the rest of the season, but it didn't matter. He was going to use every single opportunity to prepare as if that Saturday was an available game for him. Todd Hartley said that John Lilly came up to him. John Lilly, who's been around college football for a long time, been around NFL tight ends for a long time, that he came up to Hartley at one point during Ethan Barbour's rehab process and said, I have never seen any player in all of my years ever behave and prepare or try and bounce back the way that Ethan Barbour has. And I think that that's really striking because this dude is a true freshman. And that's what Hartley kept saying. He was like, for you to have that maturity and that mindset and that way of thinking as an 18-year-old kid, like you are just built differently. And look, to be built differently as a Georgia football player says a lot because there are a lot of dudes at Georgia that know that it is hard and they know that things are not always going to be fun. And for Ethan Barbour to almost stand out above that group as a guy that just has a maturity and a way of approach. And that John Lilly, as many tight ends as he's been around at every level over the years, for him to say something like that to Todd Hartley, I mean, really, really impressed me. And I think that it's the reason why we saw Ethan Barbour so early in his career when maybe we weren't necessarily expecting to, and why I think we're going to see him sooner than we ever imagined we would after the injury.
Yeah, to the point you were just making, I was going to add, John Lilly, like you'd mentioned, he's coached in the NFL. I mean, he's coached forever, and I think that quote says a lot about Ethan Barbour. I was going to add a quote I got from Lawson Lucky. I asked him about Ethan shortly after Georgia arrived in New Orleans on Monday afternoon. Quote, he's attacked his rehab. He hasn't taken a day off. When you take your rehab this seriously, you get a chance to come back early for games like this because you never know. I thought that spoke really highly of Lawson looking at a true freshman and saying this guy's earned the opportunity to come back and has an opportunity to play and contribute because I do think that they like that. And biggest thing, Ben, man, it's an embarrassment of riches at tight end at Georgia right now.
It really is. And like going back to when I talking with Hartley about the new guys that he just brought in, like he's got an embarrassment of riches, and then he's bringing in Lincoln Keys, who's your prototypical 250-pound tight end. Then you've got a Caden Prothero, who's this like flex. He was like Hartley was describing him as like it's almost a new position group that they're having to create, like a flex end type, and he's just a freak. And then you've got a Braden Fogel that almost bridges the gap between the two of those types of guys. And yeah, he has an embarrassment of riches right now, and he's going to continue to have an embarrassment of riches.
All right, so let's talk about the bad news. No Gabe Harris, no Janelle Aguero, no Kyron Jones, but that was not a surprise there. Don't expect to see Kyron for what's left of this season. How concerned are you with both, specifically Gabe and Janelle, not having them and the guys that are going to have to step up because those guys are out?
Yeah, I mean, and it's not a surprise, but throwing in Drew Bobo there as well. Like if there were any questions about what the future availability of Drew or Gabe Harris or Kyron Jones, like I don't think that the team arrival was very optimistic in terms of how difficult it was for them to deplane. So I think the Gabe one's tough, and it is a bummer. And I'm really to see how Georgia packages its defensive front, because one thing that I think after this Ole Miss game, or the Ole Miss game earlier in the season, that Georgia had to do some self-reflection. And we've heard Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann both over the last couple of weeks talk about like they didn't hit a reset, but they had to take a look at like what does their personnel do well, who within that personnel does what well, and how do they maybe repackage what they do with their roster. And I think a big piece of that was Gabe Harris's flexibility and his ability to kind of range around and do some different things and be a little bit more dominant in the pass rush than some other guys. So not having him, what does that mean? I mean, I think that means we'll see more Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, but just like Glenn Schumann said earlier in the week, they've got a jack position with guys like Quintavious Johnson, with guys like Chris Jones, with guys like Ella Mendoza, where it's like you could see some things where they rearrange how some of those guys are playing in this game. But it's not ideal. The Gabe Harris thing is not ideal in terms of how Georgia plans to be able to package it. That said, I know that Glenn Schumann knows that his roster very, very well, and he knows how they're going to be able to recover from it. On the Janelle Aguero front, it's not ideal, but we just talked about Rayshawn Dinkins at the beginning of the show, and I think that anytime you've got a guy like Rayshawn Dinkins waiting his turn, having an opportunity to step into an environment like this and play, I'm not too concerned. Like, I've seen a lot of Rayshawn Dinkins over the last 2 years, and I am not concerned about what he's going to be able to do on Thursday.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I think specifically the fact Rayshawn played in the SEC title game and held up as well as he did. I think if you don't have that, you're kind of like, oh, okay, we know that this Ole Miss passing game is really dangerous, and it still will be dangerous even with Dinkins having that experience. But I think that should really quell some fears and concerns. Knowing, too, he's still a true freshman, but I think you like what you've seen so far. The biggest question, I think, for the entire Georgia defense going into this one, you've got to be able to pressure Trinidad Chambliss. I thought, it stinks for Gabe Harris because it seemed like he was really playing well probably the last month of this season, and to lose him really hurts. Joseph Jonah-Ajayi, as you mentioned, I want to see Quintavious Johnson, going back to your point about the jack position, what Quintavious is going to do, because I think you kind of now see him as one of those lead pass rushers. And then I want to see how aggressive Georgia is blitzing its inside linebackers. I was looking at the numbers. Georgia's top three players in terms of sacks are all inside linebackers. So I would not be surprised. Maybe you see those guys on, sending two linebackers on a blitz, just trying to let those guys loose, counting on C.J. Allen, who's done a lot of good work as a pass rusher. Seeing Chris Cole, who we've seen, just be a monster in that category. To me, when we talk about this game, which we'll do after a break, really dive into it, I think you look at the defense, somebody's going to have to step up and make Trinidad Chambliss uncomfortable.
Completely agree.
All right, we are going to take a quick break and come back and then talk about this game. I mean, what we are expecting, what we want to keep an eye on, and we'll finish things off with a couple of predictions. So take a quick break. Be right back. All right, Ben, let's get into this one. The game will be 7 p.m. local time on Thursday night. Number 3, Georgia. Number 6, Ole Miss. Just start kind of generally. What interests you the most about this rematch? What you think could wind up swaying things for one team or the other once we get back in the Superdome and get this Sugar Bowl underway?
Well, it's two teams that basically couldn't stop each other for an entire game that are rematching, and both of those teams come into this matchup very aware of their issues that they had on the defensive side of the ball in the first game. So I think that both of these offenses are very capable. I just think that this is one of those games where it's all about who figures out the other team's offense better. Like, Georgia had a lot of issues with Trinidad Chambliss in the first game. I think he had 305 yards of total offense. I think he had combined for 4 touchdowns maybe. They had some playmaker. You think about Deuce Alexander on the outside, but it's another guy that ends up going for 75-yard touchdown coming out of halftime. And so they have explosive playmakers. Like, I go back to the halftime interview, or maybe it was the end of first quarter interview on the TV broadcast that John Summerall did during the Tulane Ole Miss game, and he says, like, they said why. They asked him, why are you having so much trouble early? And he was just like, perimeter speed. Like, the speed that they have on the perimeter is causing them a lot of issues. And we talk about Rayshawn Dinkins and the confidence that we have in him, and I think that Ellis Robinson has become a dude at corner. We know what Dalen Everett brings, but I mean, those guys have to have big games. Like, those guys have to play well. Not to mention on the back end with KJ Bolden and Ja'Cory Thomas and whoever else ends up getting run back there. But like, that's the matchup to me that ends up deciding if Georgia wins that matchup. Georgia will win this game. Like, I don't want to just flatly say like that's 100% the case. But if Georgia limits, like, I think it was like 270 yards passing that Trinidad Chambliss had in the first game. Like, if they keep him 50 to 60 yards under that, I think that Georgia's going to win this football game. If they don't let Trinidad Chambliss find the end zone 4 times, I think that Georgia's going to win this football game. And so I do think that there are some matchups that I look at and say, if Georgia wins that matchup, they will win this game. I don't necessarily know if I look at Ole Miss's matchups and say, if you win this matchup, you're going to win this game. I think that I say if Ole Miss wins this matchup, it gives them a much better opportunity to win the game against Georgia. So that's just kind of my feel about this game. Like, this is a Trinidad Chambliss and perimeter weapons game. Like, yes, Kewan Lacey is that guy, and if they get inside the red zone, you're probably going to have trouble keeping Ole Miss out of the end zone, because Kewan Lacey is a great runner inside the red zone, and he finds the end zone. Like, that's just what he does. He's made a career out of it, and he'll continue making a career out of it. But I don't think that, like, Georgia stopped the run well this year. Like the first game, they gave up, it was 12 carries for 32 yards for Kewan Lacey. Like, he didn't kill you in the run game. You just got to limit Trinidad Chambliss's escapability, and you can't let him get hot and comfortable with his perimeter weapons on the outside. I think Kirby Smart said earlier this week, the thing that will make that easiest for Georgia, and that is first and second down success. I think they found themselves, especially early in that Ole Miss game, in a lot of third and short situations, and it's just hard to get off the field on third down when they're in 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, and they've got a quarterback with the versatility that Trinidad Chambliss has. So winning those first and second downs, stopping Kewan Lacey in the run game on early downs, that is going to make Georgia's life a heck of a lot easier when it comes to limiting this explosive passing game. And I'll just say, I don't think people, like, I've had a lot of Georgia folks this week ask me, like, why is Georgia only a 6.5 point favorite? Like, they won by 8 the last time. They've had this whole coaching change and everything's gone on. It's like, I think that people just trust, and Vegas trusts this Ole Miss passing attack, and it's fair to. They were the best passing offense in the Power Four. Like, I don't think people are talking enough about just how dynamic Trinidad Chambliss and his receivers are. And I know a lot of people will default to it and say that's Lane Kiffin, that's Lane Kiffin. It's not. If they get into a close game, does Lane Kiffin's absence end up maybe being felt a little bit more? Yeah, I'm not disputing that. But when it comes to Trinidad Chambliss and Deuce Alexander's ability to generate big plays against anyone, like, they're going to continue to be able to do that. And if I was on the Georgia side of things, that's where I'd be most alarmed.
I wanted to mention, I meant to do this with the availability report. Kewan Lacey is probable, which is important. That was a big question for Ole Miss coming out of that Tulane game. And yeah, Trinidad Chambliss, that first game, 19 of 36, 263 yards, 1 touchdown, also rushed for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I'm with you, Ben. I think folks are quick to say, well, you know, Lane Kiffin's gone, so this Ole Miss team's not really a threat. I mean, I think that they're going to give Georgia everything they can handle, because that's the stakes of a game like this. And I think what fascinates me, and I got into this a little bit with some of the players we talked to just really this entire week, the motivation on both sides going in this game, besides the obvious of we want to win and go to the semifinal and keep our championship hopes alive, I think there's a lot of the Ole Miss that's like, you know, whether they are saying this or not, Lane Kiffin wasn't the only thing working here. You know, Trinidad Chambliss threw all those touchdowns. That was not Lane Kiffin. You know, I think that there's a chip on their shoulder of, look, we dealt with all that distraction for several months and you know, still did what we had to do, and we're here and we want to prove we belong. Georgia side, I think there's a lot of value for the Georgia folks that they played in this game last year, and they came up short. I mean, I asked Gunnar Stockton about that earlier, or I guess that was last week at this point, and he said, you know, I've still got a bad taste in my mouth, to be honest. You know, that you know, he's a guy that is not used to losing. He's a guy, you know, going back to Raven County, he did not lose a whole lot. So that stuck with him. I talked to Monroe Freeling today, and this was part of my story too. Monroe did not have a good game, and he would say as much. And, you know, he is extra motivated to come in. Again, different opponent. You can't do anything about the loss to Notre Dame. It's in the books. It's history. But I'm fascinated, Ben, from the motivation side for both sides. You could tell me that both sides are coming in with a lot that they want to prove, which I think sets up great for us, the folks who are actually going to watch this game.
I completely agree. And, you know, it's funny because Georgia just got the rematch against Alabama, and I think a lot of people are leaning into the, well, Ole Miss, maybe they're getting their second swing at it as well. And that's true. I'm not disputing that. I know that the Georgia defense feels that way, too, about this game. They gave up 5 touchdowns in 5 possessions. And so, yes, the offense was perfect or close to perfect in that first matchup. And just to call it out. I don't think you can expect that to be the case when they play on Thursday. Like, Georgia's going to punt on Thursday. I'm just going to call it now. Not even a bold prediction. I'm just going to say that Georgia will punt at some point in the game on Thursday. But I think that this defense is getting a second swing on an offense that they did not have a good day against the first time around. And I think that's going to play a role in this game too. Like, when you talk about the edge and getting revenge or whatever that is, like, Georgia, even though they won the game, there are parts of this Georgia football team that still wants to get revenge on Ole Miss.
All right, let's do it. Let's get into our prediction for this game. I'll start with mine. I've got Georgia 31-20. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. I think that ultimately Georgia is going to cover, but I think what's really going to lead Georgia is the defense. I think that they're going to play much better in the secondary. I think this is a secondary that has grown leaps and bounds since that October 18th game. Not having Jonell Aguero does hurt because of the experience. He's played in these big moments. He's come through, but I feel really, really good about what Rayshawn Dinkins is able to do. Ole Miss is going to make some plays. And again, I think this is a four-quarter game, but I'm picking Georgia to cover 31-20. Georgia moves on, and they're going to play Ohio State. There's part of me that really wants to say it's Miami because, man, we couldn't write enough stories if we have the Carson Beck versus Gunnar Stockton. But I've got Georgia 31-20. They, I guess, exact revenge back in the Sugar Bowl, and they at least leave New Orleans feeling a lot better than their last trip here.
Similar outlook for me. I would say Georgia wins the first game by 8 points. I've got them winning this game by 8 points as well. I'm predicting them to win 31-23. I think it will look, from a competitive edge standpoint, I think it'll look a lot similar to the first game. It's not going to be easy. This is an Ole Miss team that had Georgia up 9 in the fourth quarter and probably feels like they should have won that day in Athens. And that was the only game that they've lost all season. And so it's not going to be easy even without Lane Kiffin. And so, I think it will be lower scoring because I think the defenses are the side of the ball that are going to have the most to prove. And I think that they probably had the most, I don't want to say focus, but like they will be dialed in on improving what they did 2 months ago. And so I think both defenses, you can expect to see a better version of them on Thursday. So I'm going a little bit lower scoring game than the 43-35 that we saw earlier in the season, but I'm going with the same point spread, Georgia winning by 8.
Before we get out of here, let's give one player that maybe people aren't thinking about that could be a factor, and I'll start. I've been hearing good stuff about Talon Taylor, Ben.
I was thinking about going there. I
think that Georgia would like to get him involved. He's had opportunities with some deep shots. We all know about the play against Alabama in the regular season, but I think that there's a chance they try to work Talon Taylor in to give him a deep shot, to get him involved and to help him, help reward him for the way he's worked coming back from his injury. So glad I went first there, Ben. I stole that one from you, so I'll throw it back to you. Who's going to be your pick?
It's a great question. I was probably thinking Talon because I knew that they tried to get him that touchdown in the Alabama game. I think they so badly wanted to get Nate Frazier a touchdown in the Alabama game because of the fumble that he had. They wanted to get Talon Taylor a touchdown in the Alabama game because of the drop that he had the first time around. So I do think that's a good pick. On the defensive side, they're starters. They're not like, this isn't like a news flash. I just think that Christian Miller and Elijah Griffin are going to be huge for this football game because, as we've talked about, Gabe Harris not being there, and Georgia hasn't always manufactured its pass rush from the outside this year. Like, they just need Elijah Griffin and Christian Miller to dominate the interior defensive line. I think that if they're able to do that, that's obviously going to help in the run game, but I think it's going to be able to create some pockets for the linebackers and outside linebackers and pass rush as well. I do think that Chauncey Bowens is getting back to a fuller version of himself as well, and I think that there will be some opportunities in this game for him to have some explosive runs. So I think Chauncey Bowens would be someone on the offensive side that I think could have a big game in this one.
Lay out the schedule for the next few days for those who are not up to speed. Really not long after we get done talking on this podcast, we're going to go get to see about 15 minutes of Georgia practice. I am hoping have a story out of that. If they're doing yoga, that will not be the case. We will hear from Kirby Smart.
That means it will not be the case. I'm just going to get out in front of it. It means that Jordan won't have an article because they will be doing yoga.
We will have a chance to hear from Kirby Smart and Pete Golding on Wednesday morning. So we'll have that there. We'll have plenty of stories coming out of the last few days for you guys leading up to New Year's Day. Shout out Rebels 24/7, Neil McCready, and those guys. I'll have a Q&A with Neil. And I would encourage you guys, if you want to read more on the Ole Miss front, they do a fantastic job covering the Rebels. So check out Rebels 24/7 if you want to read and catch up there. And again, game is 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time. I'm sure I'll get in the stadium a little bit early, get settled in, and get ready for a wild one because I think this will be a very fun one. So before we get out of here, Ben, any parting thoughts, anything you want to shout out before this will be our last podcast of 2025? Kind of hard to believe, but anything you want to shout out before we close this thing down?
I hadn't thought about the fact it was going to be our last podcast. Well, I guess on that front, not even thinking Sugar Bowl, thanks to everybody who listened to us this year. Thanks to everybody who listened to all of our normal podcasts, but we also injected a little bit of new life into the podcast front with the recruiting show as well. So I want to appreciate anybody who listens to this or those shows because it's been a great year for the show.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. I don't know if any of our podcasts really constitute normal podcasts, but other than that, no, thanks so much. We appreciate the support. We love doing this show. So just to see folks watching and listening means a lot to me. I know it means a lot to Ben and Kip Adams as well. We put a lot of work into it, but it's fun work and it's fun stuff to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to this football game. You did mention we get Kirby Smart. Was there anything, not to go all over the place as we're trying to close this down, was there anything that you saw from Kirby Smart's press conference at all that sticks out to you?
I'll be honest, I really didn't dig
Did I just put you on the spot in the worst way?
No, it's fine. No, I mean, I kind of looked through the transcript a little bit. It was funny hearing Kirby had mentioned something with Zachariah Branch and that Andrew Smart had told him about him and was that accurate? And Kirby was like, I mean, he kind of put him in front of me. He didn't discover him.
Yeah, I think the person asked, did he showed you him or you found out about him? He's like, well, I found out about him. He didn't discover Zachariah Branch, but no, that was funny.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll end the episode there. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who's watching or listening to it after the fact. Want to say if there was any audio issues, we're recording out here.
It's his fault.
Yeah, it probably was my fault. But no, thanks to everyone who tuned in. Be sure to go to dogs247.com and subscribe. 50% off still. Telling you, it's still a great time to join because you got the rest of this playoff run. Georgia men's basketball didn't shout them out. 89-74 win over Long Island on Monday.
Just missed the journey to 100. For anyone that was following along with me, they needed 102 on Saturday or on Monday. My days are all messed up right now. Didn't quite get there. Doubt that we'll see them get there during the conference regular season, but still great non-conference slate.
12-1 run in non-conference play. They will host Auburn on Saturday, and I'll be back for that, and we'll have that coverage. And then before you know it, baseball is going to be fired up, and Olivia Sayer is going to have that covered. She does such a great job with everything she does for us, but she is the one leading the show on the baseball coverage. So sign up and join us. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Please rate and review. Helps us a ton. And I love looking at the reviews and seeing what folks are saying there. Subscribe to the YouTube Dogs 24/7. We have had a ton of videos because of all these interviews. The team arrival, talking to players coming off the plane, all that good stuff there. And then the TikTok Dogs 24/7 as well. So we will end this live episode down in New Orleans. For Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.